today with some more random photos, stories, and principles. And I usually try to put one of these together every week. Of course, you guys that have been watching me know that. And what I do is I look through my archives and I find stuff, and typically most of the pictures that I have stored on my hard drive that I took while I was working or while I was teaching, or of various different things, will be there will be a story behind each one of those, and that's usually how I roll on this kind of thing. What I did whenever I was teaching, well, when I was working to begin with at the dealership, I've mentioned on here a time or two before that if you hook up a trailer tow package by using Scotch locks and you go into the wire that's going to the tail lights particularly, turn signal not quite such a big deal, but tail lights, whenever you go in there and let's say you Scotch lock into that little 22 gauge wire that's feeding the lights on the car, and you try to pull a bunch of trailer marker lights and stuff like that, and you drive a long way to go to your fishing trip, 4, 5, 6 hours, sometimes it begins to cause all kinds of wiring problems. But what I taught my students to do, and I had a exercise that was part of their final, I had 3 relays in a box, and I had terminals they could crimp and plug in. And what I would do is I would get them to build a trailer tow package right here. This is basically just for training purposes. It wasn't one like you'd put on the vehicle. If you're going to put it on the vehicle, you would basically put a smaller box and all that kind of thing. But this one here technically would work. It's just kind of cumbersome because I needed to give them room to work in there. And I actually had a picture of it that I put on the work order, or on the worksheet rather, so that they could tell how they were supposed to do it. But first I would make them draw a schematic. I actually had this representing the trailer, this representing the trailer tow package, and this representing the vehicle with the lighting circuits that are on that. And whenever they, one of the things that they always seemed to struggle with was trying to figure out how to, obviously you had to get power. You got to bring power to these circuits here. The common terminals will not be where the power goes. You're basically, well, actually it will be on this one. I was thinking about the other one. The common terminal is going to be where the power goes, and this terminal has nothing connected to it. So whenever you turn on, your stop or your turn signal on that side, it's basically going to energize that and go to your light. This is the same way on the other side. I should have made this brown because that's usually on a lot of vehicles, or the different colors. But the trailer lights were the ones that typically cause the most problem. So the coil is closed by the circuit from the vehicle, which puts almost no load on the vehicle circuit, and then the relay is carrying a dedicated power feed that goes to the lights on the trailer and that kind of thing. But not doing that, there are trailer tow packages that a lot of the automakers for years would make that had the relays already wired, and you would just basically unplug a couple of connectors in a harness on some of them and plug in the trailer tow package that had the 3 relays in it and all that, and it protected the circuits and the switches and all on the vehicle from having to carry those extra loads they weren't designed to carry. And so I actually had a little table that had some tail lights on it, and we would use one of these jumper boxes over here with some and hook this thing up so that we could see if it worked properly. Of course, I could just look at it and see if it wired up properly, but the students enjoyed watching it turn on the lights and all that kind of thing. And that was just really an excellent exercise because it taught them how to do something that they're probably going to wind up doing. See, a lot of times when people are putting a trailer plug on a truck, most vehicles now, if they're a truck or an SUV, will come already wired for trailer. And so that's not an issue on those most of the time if it's an older vehicle, or if there's something wrong with the trailer plug and you're just starting over or whatever. But there is an issue where sometimes you may have a vehicle that's got orange turn signals that are separate from the stoplights. And in that case, you get one of those little junction blocks from the parts store. And I have actually seen those little junction blocks that were built for that, that you hook up to, so your turn signals that were orange and your stoplights that were red are both turning on the same light on the back of the trailer. They burn those things burn out too. because of carrying the extra load of the lights and all those little things. They're not made all that great. So I would put one of those on the one that had the orange turn signals and the red stoplights, and I would let come off of that and go through these relays. And that was a pretty good deal right there. We talked a lot about hooking up relays and stuff on here. Now these really small AC leaks are kind of a drag, because sometimes you just have trouble finding them unless you happen to, this is on a Ford, and this is a very common leak point on some of your Fords, some of your later model Fords, is right there where that tube goes into that edge of the core. And that basically you're going to have a condenser for this one. The dye helps to find that kind of thing, obviously. I love dye. Now I will tell you, there's a little confession I go on. You might remember some of the videos I've had on my Explorer where I was working on the AC and all. Well, that thing, I found a couple of leaks that I could see, and I fixed those, and it takes about 3 weeks or a month for the refrigerant to go low again. Well, I put dye in it, and I added a can of refrigerant, you know, and after I put the dye in it and put the refrigerant in there, I figured, well, I'll drive this thing, and when it leaks out again, I'll get my black light, and I got a black light that I use, and I'll see where my dye is showing up. Well, you look also to see if it's dripping out the evaporator drain, because that means your evaporator's leaking. I hadn't seen any dye coming out there. I can't see any dye anywhere, but I've still got a leak. Now, we worked one time on a van that the guy at the college was complaining that we could charge his van completely up. We could pull everything out, pull it down, put a fresh charged refrigerant in it, and within 2 days, that thing would be not cooling again. And so when we finally found the leak that fixed that one, it was on the suction line, and it was back there where it was really hard to see. And I had some soapy water that I sprayed on it back there where I caught that. I actually aired it up with dry nitrogen. And the leak that was losing all the refrigerant within 2 days was a very small leak in a suction line where the fitting went on there. And if you watched it with soapy water on there, it would grow a little bubble about 1/8 of an inch in diameter about once per minute and pop that bubble. That's how slow that leak was, but it would get rid of the refrigerant within 2 days. One common leak point is the compressor. The compressor loves to leak, you know, around where it's put together and that kind of thing. But I've not been able to see the dye appearing on my Explorer, and I look fairly regularly for any, you know, every now and then when it gets low on refrigerant again, I'll put another little 12-ounce can in it from the parts store, self-sealing cans, and I keep looking for the dye is telling me where it's leaking. Having issues with that, but not a big deal. You know, at Walmart you can buy a can of refrigerant for $4.88 till they make us all start going R1234, you know, which is, you know, 40 to 80 bucks a can depending on where you buy it for little cans of that stuff. These out of line pulleys, on this V-belt, that being out of line is not such a big deal like it is on the serpentine belts. But one of the things I used to caution my students about, when you've got one of these draw bolts that moves that pulley, you can tighten this thing too much so that it wipes out bearings on one of the pulleys that belt goes around. And I have seen down at the well, there was a diesel department at the college where I worked, and there was an automotive department. Occasionally somebody would take something down to the diesel department because they knew somebody that was enrolled down there. And those guys down at the diesel department, whoever it was that worked on this girl's Mitsubishi, they over-tightened the stew out of one of those because they figured too tight was better than, you know, better than just right, I guess. And they wiped out the bearings in her AC compressor because they had over-tightened that. So you have to basically pay attention to the belt deflection and know when to stop. Now the downside of that is, when I had that little Nissan I had, if you don't buy super good quality belts, if you get these cheap belts that some of the parts houses sell, you'll tighten the belt and it will stretch a little and it'll start to squeal. And you'll tighten it again, and I'm talking about over a period of 4 or 5 days, it'll stretch a little bit and it'll start to squeal. My Jeep Cherokee did that. I put a serpentine belt on there, and it didn't have a spring-loaded belt tensioner. It basically had this, you know, where you had to tighten the draw screw, and I tightened it up, and I felt good and tightened it, held, and it would start to squeal. I'd tighten it again. I had to tighten the doggone thing usually 4 or 5 times. You don't want to over-tighten it the first time and wipe out bearings, but if you don't, you know, if you're not really careful, you're going to have to work on it a whole bunch. Best thing about it is, They make belt deflection tools and all that, but I don't know if I've ever seen anybody that consistently used one of those, to tell you the truth. Because you can typically get by without them, and why do you need one on vehicles with automatic tensioners, really, So these rusty brake lines. This was on that Chevy truck I was talking about a while back, where the guy came and said, I need a master cylinder, and after we put it on there, because I thought he kind of knew what he was talking about, it still didn't have good brakes. And this line right here was leaking fluid back there. It hadn't been breached up in this area, even though it looks really bad. It was way back in the back. There was fluid dripping out from under it whenever you would apply the brake pretty hard. And we had to replace this line with some of that sexy nickel copper alloy stuff that you buy at the parts store. It's real fun, easy to work with, and you can double flare it very easily and all that kind of thing. Keeping the tools in order as to college. I had, when you got a whole bunch of people working out, everybody's really supposed to have their own set of tools. And I used to tell my students, if you can't afford to buy a set of tools, you're going to have issues when you leave, because everybody, when you go to work at a shop, are going to want to know if you got your own tools, what kind of tools you have, and do you have enough tools, and this kind of thing. So you need to basically have your tools. I used to tell them, get you some tools together. By the time you finish the program, if you go to work at a shop, you're going to have your own tools. But I didn't, if you required everybody to have a full set of tools from day one, you're going to lose about half your students. And so I would encourage them to go to Harbor Freight or somewhere like that if they were financially embarrassed and all. But this setup that I came up with here on this pegboard stuff, and that's not really uncommon setup, but when I put this on pegboard and I started hanging those things and I actually labeled each place where each tool went, that worked better than any other thing. If I had the toolbox set up, where the sockets went in a certain place and the wrenches had wrench racks and all that stuff in there. But they always tended to find a drawer that didn't have a lot of stuff in it. And when they would go back over there, they would call themselves putting the sockets back in the drawer, and they just throw it in that other drawer when they were supposed to put it back on the place where it went in the socket drawer. And that used to just burn me up. I'd spend 2 or 3 days putting the toolbox in order before a semester started when I was there by myself. And within a couple of days, whenever you've got 12, 14 students, a lot of them working out of that same toolbox, they would just turn it into something that looked like a tornado hit it. Nobody could find anything. And people would come to me and say, hey, I can't find a 15 millimeter socket, I say, well, I don't have a GPS on that thing. Who was the last person that handled it? There's ways you can do this. Now, I went and visited one college one time right after I started teaching, where the guy had come up with a system similar to this one here, but he had one student that he would assign to tool duty every day. And whenever the other automotive students came to class, they would hand this student their driver's license, and he would put it in a little card catalog file that he had in there locked up, and he would give them 10 little brass things with a number on them. The 10 ones had the same number, so if you were number 5 or number 8 or whatever, or number 16, your number would be stamped on every one of those little brass rings. They would come and ask him for a socket or a wrench. He would hand them the socket or wrench they asked for out of the tool room, and then he would hang their little brass ring with their number on it on the peg where that tool came from. And at the end of the day, you didn't get your driver's license back unless you could produce the tools to put back where your everybody got 10 little brass discs that like a little key ring thing, and that was a pretty good way of doing that. That when I saw that was at Lively Votech down in Tallahassee. I don't know how they're doing it now, but that guy did a pretty good job of coming up with that tool. Like, I had pictures of his tool room, but this one right here, like I say, this worked better than anything else I used. And these guys would come in there, and they would typically try to put the wrenches and stuff back where they went, and the hammers and all that kind of stuff. It worked a whole lot better than anything else I ever tried. This is, this is one of those unusual things where we're fixing a flat, and we found that there was a little T20 Torx bit that poked a hole, and it was sticking through to the inside. And it's always kind of funny what you find in tires. Some of the tire stores will have a big old glass jar, and all of the stuff that's unusual they pulled out of tires, they'll drop that in the glass jar. I used to keep containers of worn out and stripped out drain plugs and stuff, oil drain plugs and all. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting little picture there. I had another one I may have showed you a while back. It had a tire tool that was stuck through it, you know, that they, when it came in there, just, you run over something in the road sometimes. Paul Harvey was talking years ago about this guy that ran over a bumper jack that was laying in the road, and it came through the floorboard up into the car and killed him, you know. I mean, who expected something like that, you know? We put an engine in this 99 Expedition here. This was an engine that she got that actually came out of a Lincoln. And this guy here in the white shirt was a German foreign exchange student. That guy was really intelligent, really motivated, an excellent mechanic. I really liked him. This guy right here, he and this guy here were working together, and they put this motor in this Expedition. They did a pretty good job. Now, I will tell you that the German guy, whenever he put the wires on the starter relay back in the back, he got those on there backwards, and you know, it wouldn't work right because of that. I actually mentioned that in another video. But that got her going again on her Expedition. You know, she went and found that engine somewhere and got it to us, and it cranked and ran really good. All right, here's what everybody needs to remember, and I came up with this myself while I was writing a lesson. Performance, attitude, integrity, and dependability. If you are short on any of those, you're not going to do very well in any industry. So if you can't perform, in other words, if you can't do the job, you're just not going to do well. Well, if you can do the job, but your attitude is bad, you're going to have issues with that. And if you don't have any integrity, sooner or later, they're going to find out that you've been stealing or haven't been doing your work, and then you're going to be out of there for that reason too. Dependability, you need to show up for work every day. Those are fairly simple. I did hear on Fox News a while back, another interesting thing. They said that six-figure jobs, whenever people lose six-figure jobs, the primary main reason is people lose six-figure jobs, like over 100,000 a year, is profanity. They can't keep cuss words out of their mouth. So whenever they use filthy language, that's the chief reason that those jobs are lost. People get fired for using profanity. It's just totally amazing, isn't it, that, you know, with all the profanity you see on TV and stuff nowadays, even on shows that didn't used to have that, you know, you don't, I wouldn't allow it in my shop because there was no point in it. This one guy, when I went to work and teaching at that other little program I started over in a neighboring town, it was a brand new program. I started a brand new shop, brand new tools, brand new everything, brand new lifts, brand new building. And one of the guys, it was for dual enrollment students, and one of the guys came in there and he goes, since we're working in a shop, can we use foul language? I said, why do you want to? And then I wrote on the board, profanity is a disease. You know, some people, when they find out you don't like profanity, they start using more of it because they think it gives them some kind of control over you, but basically they just got poop in their mouth, and they're the ones that look gross, you know. That's what I told one guy. This was one day whenever I had come home from work, and for some reason I handed my wife my camera, and she wanted to take a picture of me leaning against the cabinet there, but I wasn't really in as bad a mood as it looks like right there, you know. But you know, at the end of the day, sometimes you can be pretty wrung out if you've had a sort of a grueling day. All right, what we got right here is this student said, this is another exercise about using 2 relays, 2 switches, a power source, and like a power window motor, so that whenever you mash this switch, the motor turns one way, and when you mash that one, it turns the other way. I used to give these people this. I'd say, figure out how to wire this up so it'll work this way. And there were some people, there was a girl in there that I had at that dual enrollment center I'm talking about, and when I put this on the board, I mean, she didn't have any automotive training whatsoever. She had, you know, long frizzy red hair and all that kind of stuff. And I would have her go up to that board, and I had a big board where you could draw with your finger on it. It was like a big TV screen, you know, it had Android and Windows and all that stuff on it if you wanted to boot it up. And I would say, this is your objective, show me how to do this. And she'd never seen anybody do it. And that girl with her finger using on that board, she drew that schematic flawlessly, and it worked perfect the first time she did it. I was just blown away by that. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, this guy right here, he was really sharp too, red-headed guy. He says, I can do this blindfolded. So he had another student hold a poster board in front of his face and just feel into the wires. This was a board that had a little whirly-bird light on it that would spin one way and then another, you know. And that little whirly light was visually interesting, you know, whenever you did that. If you did it right, everybody could tell if you had done it right or wrong by the fact that when you push one button, the light would spin one way, and when you push the other button, it spin the other way. Well, that's how you wire it up, right there. basically your switch is going to operate the coil, and this is the common terminal on this one is going to the motor, and then your normally closed terminal is going to be grounded, and then this one here is going to be powered. So, and he did that in a fairly short period of time. I built this board out of junk, you know, except I bought that light right there, the switches and relays and stuff. But I had this plexiglass board somebody had come up with. I like to build my trainers because I enjoy building the trainers, and because I can custom make a trainer where it will really teach somebody an awful lot really quick. And it's not like, you know, some of the trainers that you buy are like $6,000 or $8,000 or $10,000, and when you look at it for about 5 minutes, you learned everything it can teach you, and then you want to move on to something else. You know, I like something you can get bang for the buck out of, and these little boards that I built did like that. Now here's right there. I want you to save this picture, do a screenshot, whatever you got to do. And this right here was sent to me by my cousin, and my cousin lives up in Tennessee. Now, this car, he found this picture in an old photo album of this car. Now, notice it's got the 3 bumper strips, right? And it actually had the option of cranking it with a crank. It had that little thing there on it. And this thing right here, and notice the spoke wheels, how this is mounted, the Landau bar back there in the back, and this little shade, and that windshield, you know, would flip out and give you a little air driving down the road. I want you guys to dig around and do as much research as you can and figure out what kind of car that is, exactly what car it is. Don't guess at it. It's got to be exactly this car. When you find the one that's got these 3 bumper strips and it has all of this same, and it's a 2-door, it's a coupe, and it's a convertible. See what I mean? So keep that in mind. This is what you're looking for. If you're interested in doing that, save that picture and go looking for what kind of car that is. Now, I will tell you that I actually posted that on by one of my Facebook pages or something, you know, where I talk to a lot of mechanics. And one guy among all of those people went and found what kind of car that was. And when he posted it, I instantly knew it was the same car, because it had all of the necessary elements. You can find other cars that are similar, but you're not going to find one that's exactly like that unless you find exactly what kind of car this is. And you'll probably be surprised at it's not the brand name of a car you would expect either. So, but it is a familiar brand name. So just go digging for that. That's a challenge that I'm issuing. And whenever you guys come back with it, put me a link where you can show me a picture of the car you're talking about, and that way I'll know if it's the one that we're looking at or not. Anyway, that's a little bit of fun we can engage in. I got a little story right here. When I was about this age, our house burned down, and we had of course, the way that I went back then was I had a horse or a bicycle, and you know, a little bit later I built a dune buggy. I'll show you that thing in a minute. But you see this truck, this exact truck, this not one like it. This is a 51 Ford. It was sitting out there with the grass growing up around it. But I was out there when I was 13 years old, and I was kicking a rock because there was nothing to do on a Sunday afternoon. And you know, my horse was in a pasture about 2 or 3 miles down the road. I didn't want to walk off down there and get the horse, you know. And I can't remember. I didn't even have my bicycle there where I was. So I just got there on Sunday afternoon, nothing to do. That 51 Ford pickup turned into that driveway. And the guy that was driving it was my really good friend of mine. I was 13, he was 18. He could have been anywhere he wanted to be that afternoon. And he'd been driving for a couple of years already. And I walked out and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Go get your cutoffs. We're going to go into the swimming hole." So we went down to the creek and went swimming because he was thinking about me. That guy could have been anywhere he wanted to be, but he was thinking about me and how the house had burned down, and he just wanted to cheer me up a little bit, you know. And so me and him went together down to the swimming hole, and we just sat around on our inner tubes down there, and we just in the shade and shot the bull and enjoyed the summer. You know, it was in the hottest part of the summer too. But that truck right there was the exact truck that happened. That's how long ago that was. Here's the truck grown up in weeds now. I was wanting to buy that truck, you know, whenever he had first parked it down there when his daddy had. And he says, I says, "Can I buy that 51 Ford truck from you? Because I wanted to fix it up and drive it." And he says, "Well," he said, he was talking about his oldest son that had come to pick me up. He goes, "He cut his teeth on the steering wheel of that truck." He said, "I hate to sell it." But anyway, it sat down there in the weeds like that and went away. Alabama state troopers in the 70s drove these AMC Javelins. Now, You got to remember that was before the days of radial tires, but these things would absolutely fly. And it was just a really interesting ride for a state trooper to be driving. And so that's what they were driving. Some, not all of the state troopers, don't get me wrong. A lot of them drove the plain old LTD, you know, cars like you're used to seeing state troopers drive and all that before big cars went away. They started using SUVs for everything. But anyway, that's just a cool ride. I don't know if a lot of you guys knew that in Alabama troopers used those in the early 70s. Now here's something right here I like to talk about. In 72, look at the bumper and look at this bumper. This bumper had shock absorbers behind it because the government required shock bumpers that were supposed to prevent minor collisions from damaging the vehicle. You know, like if you ran into something with that bumper, I guess they felt like it damaged the vehicle. So all the bumpers were required to have that for a period of time. And so, and they had the metal bumper, they stick out. They had this, you know, they had them shock absorbers actually made behind the bumper. It was just a wacky way to do stuff. And all the way up into sometime in the 80s, that was required. I think the mid to late 80s they required that. And the Ford Tempo had bumpers that would withstand 8-mile-an-hour collisions. I was driving an 81 Mercury Lynx, and I was sitting at a traffic signal down at the beach, and somebody rear-ended the car behind me and pushed that car into me, and it just wiped out the car behind me and the one that rear-ended it, and it knocked me, you know, it jerked my neck back and pushed me almost into the car in front of me. But when I looked at the car that I was driving, the shock bumpers that were on that car had actually moved forward enough to where the, you know, the side part of the bumper on that one that was plastic, but this was metal, and actually made marks on the car, and you could tell it went that far in and absorbed all of that impact and did not damage the little Mercury Lynx station wagon that I was driving. I thought that was incredible. But anyway, this all went away, and you might notice now that the bumpers are plastic and they got styrofoam behind them. You know, it's just, that's a totally different world now. You could probably look that up and see when that regulation changed, but this became a thing in 1973, a requirement. That's a 72 Chevrolet, that's a 73 Chevrolet. All right, how about that smoking clutch? I always like to take a little video when something like that's happened, you know. And this can happen from a number of reasons, you know, if that thing is worn down to the point where it's dragging against there all the time and whenever it's slipping, or if you energize the clutch and the compressor's locked up and this pulley's still spinning but it can't spin that, it'll make them smoke like that. That was a cool little piece of video I had. This is something that's really hard to find. I located it in a magazine that came out in 1976. If you look for this online and try to say, when did a Buick first outrun a horse? This was actually a Buick ad is what it was. But the point is, looking for this picture or this incident anywhere online, that's an actual photograph now, it's not an artist's conception. This says the horse was more sleek, you know, more than sleek flanks, flaring nostrils, and sinewy beauty represented a way of life. It was the status quo. The car was a machine trying to shoulder its way into a lifestyle. It was still not completely at ease with machines. There had to be a confrontation. The machine had to be put in its place. But see, this was the first time that a vehicle, they claim, outran a horse, and everything changed after that. Now this looks to me like it took place in about 1889 or something like that. This article doesn't reference the date, but this picture was a sort of a centerfold in a time, well, it's actually in this issue of Time magazine, and there's the picture, you know, that I've got out of the middle of it. Look for that picture just about anywhere else. It's probably in Time magazine's archives somewhere if you know how to look that kind of stuff up. But I thought that was really cool. Now there's different ways that variable cam timing control is dealt with. This is, I was noticing, I was basically doing a little bit of a study on that. And this right here is one way it's done. This is another way it's done. And this is the way, this is obviously a Toyota schematic. And this is Ford. And I forgot who that was. But the point is I'm trying to make is, see, this is exhaust valve control, exhaust control 2, exhaust control 1, and variable valve intake control, and then you got oil pump control there. But they use oil solenoids to let oil pressure go in there and operate these cam phasers and all that kind of thing. But see, everybody's pretty much doing the same job, but they got their own way of doing it. You notice this one here is hardwired to ground, and power is coming out of there, those solenoids. That's a little bit unusual there. All right, now look at this one here. This one's hardwired to power, and they got ground coming out of the PCM. This one here is basically controlling both sides. So those are the three ways that it's dealt with. The reason I had all three of them was this one here is actually controlling it with power, that's controlling it with ground, and that's controlling both sides of it. Controlling both sides of an electronic circuit is very common on some of the newer vehicles, particularly gasoline direct injection. The injectors are done that way, and so is the injector, the little control solenoid in the pump. All right, this is me and my old buggy that I built when I was about 14 years old. This right here is how old I was when I built it. You can tell I was older there in that video. That's my younger brother, Mark, sitting there on there. And here I was driving around in the yard, and Mom was taking a 8mm video of that because she loved taking 8mm videos. But this thing, believe it or not, was street legal because it had a tag, and it had a stoplight, and it had a tail light. In Alabama in those days, if you weren't going to drive at night, you weren't required to have headlights. You were only required to have one stoplight in the back. Matter of fact, and you can see that stoplight and that tag right there. It had a valid license plate. I was crossing. I was on a dirt road. And I was crossing a road where there were some troopers out there, and they were doing something. And when the trooper walked over there when I stopped at the stop sign, and he said, "Is this thing street legal?" I said, "Well, it's got a tag and a tail light." And he walked around. He didn't even ask me for my driver's license. I don't even remember if I had one at the time. Of course, I was just going from one dirt road to another, just crossing the state highway. But he walked back there and he looked at the tag and the tail light, and he goes, "Yep, it looks like you're okay." He said, "Be careful." So I just took off and drove away. This was not a trooper that I knew. He was just somebody that didn't see where I was going to be causing a problem. I imagine today they'd probably run you out of here on that. There's an old guy that I know that's a retired lieutenant colonel that said that he grew up in Indiana somewhere up there. He was telling me that he had some kind of a car that would spin the tires really good, and so he went spinning his tires all the way through an intersection one time when he took off from the light. But when he got through the intersection, he stopped spinning his tires and just drove away at normal speed, and so he got a ticket from the local cop for spinning his tires through the intersection. Now that's obviously something you don't need to do, and so when they went to court, the judge, it was kind of comical. The judge says, "Well, did he exceed the speed limit?" And he says, "Well, no." He said, "Did you lose control of the vehicle?" He says, "No." And the guy says, "Well, I don't even know why you gave him a ticket." And he said outside the courtroom, that lawman got in his face and shook his finger at him and said, "I'll get you if it's the last thing I do, you little sucker." But also, in the early 70s, not long after this video here was taken, it was McDonald's had just come to this town that I live in, and these guys on these muscle cars would pull around. When they leave the drive-through, just boiling their tires. They smoked the parking lot up and everything else. Nobody said anything about it. I mean, nobody gave a rip. That's just what you did back whenever it was in the muscle car era. And but this one guy that I knew that was really funny, he drove a little Chevrolet Vega, and he wasn't any kind of a hot rod nut or something like that. And these guys were always showing off on their cars, boiling their tires and all. And if you went out to certain places, you could find. But it was kind of like American Graffiti. If you knew where to go, you could find a street race. I mean, a road race, not a street race. Nobody raced in town back then. But it was funny how people would get out there on some lonely back road and they'd race, And I saw an accident one night where somebody raced, but that's another story. But anyhow, somebody went boiling their tires around McDonald's when I was standing there talking to him, because we always used to hang out there in the parking lot and shoot the bull, And he had his arms folded, and when that guy boiled his tires coming around, he looked over there and he goes, "I wish my car would do that." He was obviously being sarcastic because he wouldn't do that even if his car would do that. This is my office in 2019, shortly before I retired. And you can see the desk that I had here, and file cabinet over here, and a lot of these books in here were books that I didn't use anymore, but I kept them for reference. And this is all my certificates and stuff on the wall and all that. These are Best Ideas contest winners that I got. There. There's a fourth one somewhere, but I don't know where it is. From Ford Motor Company, when I would send in ideas to the Service Parts magazine that Ford had. And then that's where we got our ASE certification. I re-upped that program 4 times while I was there. And I was there for about 19 years. But this guy was my first graduate. You notice he's got full ASE certification and L1. He worked in the field for about 10 years. But he wanted to start doing some farming. I also got G1 because I was required to get it, and I've still got it. But anyway, he wanted to do some farming and stuff. And so what he did was he started farming. He had some land out there, and he started buying cows and all. And so he took a job as my adjunct instructor, and it was just a part-time teaching position, but he was really good at it. And he is still the adjunct instructor at that school now. And he knows what he's doing, and he knows how to teach, and he's real patient with the kids. He's just really good and all that. But these notes right here are notes that my work study students wrote, you know, about, hey, this has been a wonderful job, blah, blah, blah. And then that's got a picture of my wife up there and all that. But this stuff right here was a whole, that clock with that brake rotor design was one that I bought for $25 at the Ford place where I used to work at. I went over one day and they were selling it, had stuff like that on sale, and I bought that. It didn't even have anybody's brand name on it, but it was a cool looking clock. And the second hand didn't jump like that, it went real smooth like some of them do. That's me and a couple of my grandkids. Anyway, that was my office, which is totally looked different now. There's somebody else in there, then they do it a different way. We'd put invoices in that right there, and I'd process them and all that kind of thing. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I really hope you guys will come back again and leave me some feedback. I appreciate your comments.